Welcome to the deep dive. Imagine this tiny human, right, arriving in the world seems totally helpless.
hmm
But then, fast forward just 2 years and boom, they're walking, talking, thinking, feeling individuals. How does that even happen?
It's an incredible transformation, isn't it?
Totally. So today, we're diving deep into those foundational first 2 years. We're focusing on what the experts call the neonatal phase and then infancy.
Right. A birth up to about 2 years old.
Exactly. And our mission here is to pull out the really key bits of knowledge, the important insights from, well, a whole stack of expert sources.
Giving you a shortcut, basically.
Yeah, a shortcut to being really clued in about babyhood. And honestly, some of these facts might just blow your mind.
And actually, before we jump right in, there's something important to frame all this. It's an interesting fact, but also a bit, well, perturbing.
That's
Less than 3% of the articles published in major developmental journals actually include data from low and middle income countries.
Wow, only 3%. But isn't that where most babies live?
Exactly. About 90% of the world's infants live there. So it highlights the significant bias in a lot of the research we'll be talking about.
That's really crucial context to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning then. The neonatal phase, that's birth to 4 weeks. For like over a century, thinkers like William James, the psychologist, described the baby's world as one great blooming buzzing confusion.
Yeah, that was the classic description.
Right. And even someone like Piaget, famous researcher, he mostly saw that first month just in terms of reflexes.
Like they were just little machines, basically. Eating, sleeping, breathing, crying.
Pretty much. That sounds like the picture.
And that really was the dominant view, maybe until the 1960s, surprisingly recently.
Yeah.
But newer research. It's shown that development during this neonatal phase is way more advanced and psychologically really significant, much more than people thought.
Okay, so not just confusion then.
Not at all. It's a period of really astonishing rapid-fire adjustments.
Incredible. But okay, let's step back for a second. Physically, for a first-time parent, what a newborn looks like can be, well, a surprise.
Oh, definitely.
Our sources use phrases like not very attractive, even comparing them to a defeated boxer. Swollen, maybe purple, flat nose, skewed ears. Is that really normal?
It's absolutely normal. And, it's understandable parents might be a bit taken aback.
Right.
But those features, the swelling, maybe some bruising, even neonatal jaundice, which it's about half of newborns.
Well, just right, the yellowing.
Yeah, exactly. Usually clears up in 10, 14 days. It's just the liver being a bit immature. All that stuff is common and temporary. It's part of the journey.
Okay, so it's just temporary effects of birth. What are the typical stats then? Weight, length.
Sure. So average weight is between 2.5 and 4.5 kilograms, with 3.5 kilos being most common. Length is usually 45 to 56 centimeters.
And heart rate. Seems like it would be fast.
It is. Resting, it's maybe 80, 90 beats per minute, but when they're crying, it can shoot up to 170. A healthy range is generally 120, 150, and girls and firstborns, they tend to be just slightly smaller. Oh, and they can lose up to 10% of their birth weight initially.
Really? Why is that?
Mostly just fluid loss. They usually gain it back by about day 10 or 14, though.
Okay, so from being totally dependent in the womb to basically independent life in just 4 weeks, that seems like a massive leap. What are the biggest adjustments they have to make?
It's a truly critical changeover. I mean, think about blood circulation. The baby suddenly takes full responsibility for purifying blood.
How does that switch happen?
That very first breath forces blood to the lungs, which are now filling with air just as the umbilical cord is cut. It's an immediate system change.
Amazing. And breathing itself.
Right. They have to get oxygen on their own now. Breathing usually starts the moment air hits their skin. Sometimes they need a little help clearing mucus.
And if they don't get enough oxygen?
That's called anoxia, oxygen shortage. If it's prolonged, it can cause brain damage, which is why it's monitored so closely.
What about the old slap on the bottom? Is that still a thing?
No, that's considered obsolete now. Babies typically cry spontaneously. If not, rubbing their back and chest is usually enough stimulation.
Got it. What else? Waste elimination.
Yep, starts within minutes of birth. First that dark green stuff, meconium, then it changes based on what they're eating. And urination is super frequent, like 18 times in 24 hours.
Well, okay, and body temperature. That must be a shock, too.
Huge shock. Going from about 38 degrees Celsius in the womb to maybe 22 degrees room temperature.
Correct. How do they cope? They don't have much fat.
Right. They lack insulating fat initially and lose heat fast. But they increase their activity levels when cold, and they start building up a fat layer in those first few weeks. Sweat glands kick in around 1 month, too, helping regulate.
And the nervous system, you mentioned the brain isn't fully developed.
Correct. Structurally similar to an adult's, but the brain's only about 25% of adult weight. And the cerebral cortex, the thinking, problem-solving part, is still very much under construction.
But you said their abilities are underestimated.
Definitely, because reflexes play such a central role. There are these built-in adaptive responses that help them survive before complex learning takes over.
So for ages, people thought the newborn's world was just a blur, right? This glooming, buzzing confusion. But what can they actually perceive?
Yeah, that old idea is really outdated now. New techniques show some pretty impressive capabilities right from the start. Take vision.
Okay.
They have a functional visual system, but yeah, it's poorly developed because, well, it was dark in the womb.
Makes sense.
They'll blink in bright light. They can follow a moving light. Even fetuses react to strong light shown on the mother's belly.
But their focus is bad.
Very. Visual acuity is maybe 20 to 40 times worse than an adult's. They can only really focus clearly about 20-25 centimeters away.
It's about
Roughly the distance to a mother's face when she's holding them.
convenient. So the rest of the world is a blur.
Pretty much, yeah. You could say they're basically legally blind at first.
But you mentioned faces earlier. That's where it gets really interesting, right?
Right. It really is. They pay way more attention to human faces than to simple shapes or patterns.
Even newborns.
Yep. Studies show babies as young as 10 hours old, up to 5 days, prefer looking at a drawing of a face.
Wow. And recognizing their mother.
Within 1 to 2 weeks, sometimes even sooner, they can distinguish their mother's face from a stranger's.
How do they do that so quickly?
Well, recent research suggests it's actually multisensory. It's significantly easier for them when they can also smell their mother's clothes at the same time.
Smell plays a role too. Fascinating. What about color?
At birth, it's mostly black, white, and shades of gray. The color cells in the eye, the cones, aren't fully developed yet.
So they can't see colors at all.
They seem to prefer looking at colored pictures over black and white, but they can't really distinguish between colors until red starts to appear for them around 2-3 months.
And full color vision takes years.
Yeah, the full spectrum develops more gradually, becoming adult-like around 4 or 5 years old.
Okay, so vision starts blurry but is tuned into faces. What about hearing?
Their hearing apparatus is also a bit immature at birth. There's often amniotic fluid still in the middle ear, muffling things initially.
But they can hear before birth.
Yes. Fetuses can hear external sounds as early as 18 weeks.
And after birth.
Within just hours, neonates can tell their mother's voice apart from a stranger's.
Incredible. Do they prefer certain sounds?
They generally prefer higher-pitched sounds, like a mother's voice often is, and they can locate sounds in space pretty quickly, which suggests some early coordination between hearing and vision.
Okay, hearing, vision. What about smell and taste?
Smell is surprisingly developed. They can distinguish pleasant from unpleasant smells, like they'll start sucking more for pleasant ones or grimace and turn away from bad ones.
And they recognize mom's smell.
Yes, they can distinguish their mother's breast by smell alone.
Amazing. And taste.
Not super sensitive yet, but they can tell sweet, bitter, and sour apart. They definitely have a preference for sweet. It increases sucking.
And bitter or sour?
Causes aversion, they'll turn away. There are individual differences, of course, and hunger affects how they react.
Does the mother's diet affect their taste development?
It seems so. They can detect taste from the mother's milk, which might actually start familiarizing them with the kinds of foods their family or culture eats.
A very early introduction to cuisine. Now, pain. This is a tough one. For a long time, the belief was that neonates didn't really feel pain.
Yeah, a really unfortunate misconception.
So what's the understanding now? And what does that mean for how we treat them, especially medically?
Today, it's widely acknowledged they experience pain much like adults do.
But procedures were done without pain relief.
Sadly, yes. Many painful procedures like circumcision or blood draws were often performed without adequate pain management.
What are the consequences of that?
We now know that ineffective pain management can have really severe short-term and long-term negative effects. It can impact cognitive and neurodevelopmental outcomes and even lead to extreme pain sensitivity later on.
So how should pain be managed?
Proper pain monitoring is crucial. Using pain scales designed for infants, observing physiological signs like heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, and watching behavioral responses like prolonged, high-pitched crying or specific motor movements, it completely changes the approach to neonatal care.
It's really sobering to think how recently that understanding changed. Okay, so beyond these innate senses and reflexes, can neonates actually learn things in those first few weeks?
Absolutely. It's quite remarkable. Researchers have observed three main types of learning.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's classical conditioning, like Pavlov's dogs.
Right.
Babies can be conditioned. For example, if you gently stroke a baby just before giving them something sweet, after a few times, they might start sucking just from the stroke itself.
Huh. Does any stimulus work?
Apparently not. It has to be something meaningful to their experience. Second type is operant conditioning.
That's learning through rewards and consequences.
Exactly. Researchers have successfully changed neonate behavior by rewarding specific actions, like giving a sweet reward if they turn their head a certain way, or even controlling the amount of milk they get based on how they regulate their sucking pattern.
Wow, okay. And the third type?
This one was debated for a long time. Modeling or imitation.
Babies imitating adults.
Yeah.
Really? That early?
Yes. It sounds incredible, but research, some of it quite groundbreaking, shows that neonates can imitate adult facial expressions like opening their mouth, sticking out their tongue, even hand gestures.
How early?
Some studies show this as early as 36 hours after birth, and maybe even more complex expressions like joy, sorrow, and surprise too.
That really points to a surprising level of connection or awareness right from the get-go.
It really does. It challenges that old blooming, buzzing confusion idea fundamentally.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Feeding. Obviously a huge part of a newborn's life. A lot of their awake time is spent feeding, right?
A very significant portion, yes.
So what's the latest thinking on the whole breastfeeding versus bottle feeding debate, especially with everything we now know about early development?
Well, the frequency varies a lot. Could be 8 times a day, could be 14, usually with 1.5 to 5-hour intervals between feeds. But under normal circumstances, most health authorities strongly favor breastfeeding.
Why is that? What are the main advantages?
There are quite a few. First, antibodies. Breast milk is packed with antibodies that protect the baby against intestinal illnesses like diarrhea, respiratory diseases like bronchitis and pneumonia, and also allergic reactions.
That's huge. What else?
The specific nutrients in breast milk seem to stimulate brain growth and myelination, that process of coating nerve fibers we talked about. Cow's milk, by contrast, primarily stimulates muscle growth.
Interesting difference. Easier digestion, too.
Much easier. Which generally leads to less constipation and diarrhea. Also, breastfed infants tend to be leaner at 1 year old, which might play a role in preventing overweight and obesity later in life.
What about dental health?
Sucking directly from the mother's nipple helps avoid issues with teeth alignment, what's called malocclusion, and it protects against tooth decay you can sometimes get from sugary liquids lingering in bottles.
And nutritionally complete.
Generally, yes. No need for other foods until around 6 months. The iron in breast milk is also very easily absorbed, whereas bottle-fed babies typically need iron-fortified formula.
Does it affect introducing solid foods later?
Potentially. Breastfed infants often accept new solid foods more easily. The thinking is they get exposed to a wider variety of subtle flavors through the mother's diet via the milk.
Okay, that's a strong case for breastfeeding. But now, this next point sounds really complex and frankly quite difficult. Breastfeeding and HIV/AIDS.
It is. It's a very complex and often highly controversial issue, particularly in resource-poor regions of the world.
What's the basic risk?
Without any intervention, an HIV-positive mother has about a 15 to 45% chance of transmitting the virus to her baby through pregnancy, birth, or breastfeeding.
So bottle feeding seems like the obvious answer.
Logically, yes, in terms of eliminating that specific transmission route. But it's not that simple on the ground. In many communities, there's a very strong cultural tradition of breastfeeding.
So not breastfeeding could cause problems.
Yes, it can lead to negative social perceptions, stigma, even isolation for the mother. Plus, there's new research, especially from South Africa.
What does that show?
It shows that exclusive breastfeeding, when combined with the mother consistently taking antiretroviral medication, or ARVs, significantly reduces the risk of HIV transmission.
So the medication makes breastfeeding safer.
Much safer. The World Health Organization actually recommends that mothers take ARVs throughout the breastfeeding period until the infant is at least 12 months old.
But what about places with unsafe water or where formula is unaffordable?
That's the really crucial counterpoint. In areas where water might be contaminated or where families can't afford formula or lack the means to sterilize bottles properly,
Then bottle feeding itself becomes risky.
Exactly. In those situations, formula-fed babies face a higher risk of dying from infections like diarrhea or from malnutrition than breastfed babies do from potentially contracting HIV, especially if the mother is on ARVs.
Wow, that's a stark trade-off. It really highlights how context is everything.
Absolutely. There's no single right answer that applies everywhere. It depends heavily on the resources, the cultural context, and access to meditation and clean water.
Okay, so that intense neonatal phase leads into infancy proper, birth to 2 years. This period is also described as critical, challenging, and dangerous. Why those strong words?
Well, it's critical because it lays the foundation for so many behavioral patterns, how we interact, how we learn, how we cope.
Right, the foundations.
It's challenging because the infant is driven by this increasing desire for independence. They start crawling, walking, running, exploring everything.
And dangerous.
Because that newfound mobility isn't matched by an ability to foresee consequences. They might run into traffic, touch a hot stove, poke things into electrical sockets. Their curiosity outpaces their judgment.
Which can lead to accidents.
Tragically, yes. Fatal accidents are a real risk during this period, and it's also when we see the peak risk for sudden infant death syndrome, or CIDS.
Seasides, right, often called cot death. What do we actually know about why it happens? It seems so mysterious.
It is largely unknown, which is terrifying for parents,
Sure.
but the triple risk model gives us a framework for thinking about it.
Triple risk. What does that involve?
It suggests SIDs is most likely to occur when three things align. First, a vulnerable infant may be underlying biological issues we don't fully understand.
Okay.
Second, a vulnerable developmental period. The risk is highest between 2 and 4 months, and it seems to be slightly more common in boys.
And third.
An additional precipitating factor or trigger, this could be related to sleep environment, like sleeping position or soft bedding, or maybe exposure to smoke.
Are there other known risk factors?
Yes. Factors like poverty, young maternal age, maternal smoking or substance use during pregnancy, low birth weight, prematurity, and possibly some genetic factors seem to increase risk.
But these are correlations, right? Not direct causes.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that. The research shows associations, relationships between factors, but not a definite cause and effect link for any single factor.
So the focus is on reducing known risks where possible.
Precisely. Things like safe sleep practices, putting babies to sleep on their backs, firm mattress, no loose bedding, that advice comes directly from this correlational research.
Okay, let's shift to the brain again. All this physical growth and change must be driven by incredible developments happening inside the head.
Absolutely. The brain's development underpins literally everything else.
Can you give us a quick tour? What are the main parts involved?
Sure. Broadly, you've got the forebrain, which includes the cerebrum or cerebral cortex, that's the largest part, responsible for higher functions, learning, thinking, planning actions. It has 2 hemispheres, left and right.
The left brain, right brain thing?
We'll get back to that. And it has 4 main lobes. The frontal lobe for movement, language, cognition, the parietal for sensory info, the occipital for vision, and the temporal for hearing and memory.
Okay, that's the thinking part.
Yeah.
What else?
Then there's the hindbrain, which includes the cerebellum, crucial for movement, posture, balance, and the brainstem, which handles vital functions like breathing and heartbeat, and connects the cerebrum to the spinal cord.
Got it.
There's also the smaller midbrain, connecting the forebrain and hindbrain. And deep inside, the limbic system, really important for emotion and behavior.
What structures are in the limbic system?
Key ones include the basal ganglia, involved in movement, learning, and rewards, the amygdala, which processes emotionally charged memories, things like rage, fear, sexual feelings, and the hippocampus, vital for memory formation, connecting senses to memories.
So back to the hemispheres. That popular idea of being left-brained or right-brained, analytical versus creative. Is there any truth to that?
Honestly, it's largely a myth.
Really?
Yeah. While it's true that the hemispheres do specialize to some extent, like speech processing often being more dominant in the left and maybe processing humor more in the right, but complex thinking, the kind we do all the time, almost always involves both hemispheres working together. Most behaviors require activity across both halves. They function as an integrated unit.
So you don't really have people where one side is just generally more active overall.
Research doesn't really support that idea. It's the interaction and coordination between the hemispheres that's key, not dominance of one side.
That makes way more sense.
Okay.
So beyond the basic structure, how does the brain actually work and develop its connections during infancy?
It's all about the neurons, the nerve cells. That's the gray matter. They communicate using electrical impulses and chemical signals called neurotransmitters. You might have heard of some like dopamine or serotonin. A
Hmm.
really critical process in early development is synapse formation. The infant brain goes wild, creating connections between neurons way more than it actually needs.
More than it needs. Why?
It seems to be about creating potential pathways. Then comes the next crucial step, synaptic pruning.
Pruning, like a gardener.
Exactly like that. The brain eliminates the connections that aren't being used frequently. This makes the remaining pathways stronger and the whole system much more efficient at processing information.
So it sculpts itself based on experience.
Precisely. It happens as neural transmission gets more efficient, leading to improvements in cognitive processes.
What about white matter? We hear about that too.
White matter is also vital. It's made up of the long tails of neurons, the axons, that are covered in a fatty substance called myelin.
Like insulation on a wire.
Perfect analogy. This myelin sheath allows nerve impulses to travel much, much faster and more efficiently. It's crucial for rapid neural conduction and processing speed.
And this myelination happens after birth too.
Yes, it begins prenatally but continues significantly after birth, contributing hugely to the rapid cognitive gains we see in infancy.
What influences this whole brain development process?
It's a constant interplay. Environmental factors are huge: parenting style, exposure to trauma, socioeconomic status, the amount and type of stimulation a baby receives, and of course, biological factors, primarily genetics, lay the groundwork.
A dynamic dance between nature and nurture. Okay, let's connect this brain development back to physical milestones. Motor development, how babies learn to move.
Right. We usually talk about gross motor skills and fine motor skills.
Joe's meaning.
Big movements, the ability to move the whole body around, rolling, crawling, walking. This progresses from near immobility to amazing mobility, thanks to advances in the skeleton, nerves, and muscles.
And there are patterns to it.
Yes, predictable patterns. Growth is generally cephalocaudal, meaning head to tail. So babies gain head control before they can control their arms and legs effectively.
At first. Okay.
And it's also proximal distal, near to far. Control over the torso and large muscles comes before control over fingers and toes, the finer movements.
So trunk control before finger control.
Exactly. The trunk actually grows fastest in the first year, while the legs grow fastest in the second year.
And weight gain.
They typically double their birth weight every 4 to 5 months in that first year. By 12 months, the average height is around 72 centimeters.
So the sequence is head support, then rolling, crawling.
Generally, yes. Head support leads to rolling over, then often sitting up, then crawling, though not all babies crawl, then pulling themselves up to stand, and finally, walking.
When does walking usually happen?
The average is around 12 months, but there is a huge range of normal variation. Anywhere from maybe 9 months to 16 or 17 months is pretty typical.
Okay, that's gross motor. What about fine motor skills? Hands and fingers.
This starts with those primitive reflexes, like the grasp reflex, but gradually, reaching and grasping become purposeful.
How does that develop?
Around 5 months, they might use their whole hand to crudely grasp something. By 7 months, they use the palm more effectively, the palmar grasp. Then they start transferring objects from one hand to the other.
And fingers getting involved.
Yes, between 6 and 12 months. Around 8 months, you see the scissor grasp using 4 fingers against the thumb. Then, the big one, the pincer grasp around 9 months.
Index finger and thumb.
Exactly. That precise ability to pick up small objects. Letting go voluntarily is tricky at first, but they usually master that by 10 months.
What can they do by 1 year, 2 years?
By 12 months, many infants love putting things into containers and often throwing them out again. By 2 years, their fine motor skills are much more advanced. They can stack a few blocks, use a spoon somewhat effectively, maybe help take off some clothes, turn doorknobs, scribble with a crayon, rotate objects in their hands.
What about hand preference? Being righty or lefty, when does that emerge?
Well, there are strong hints it might start even before birth. Ultrasound studies show some fetuses preferentially suck one thumb over the other.
Interesting. And after birth.
Babies often start showing a preference around 1 year old. About 90% lean towards being right-handed, but it's very common for them to switch back and forth until they're maybe 3 or 4 years old.
So it's not fixed early on.
Not usually. And it's so important to remember that historically, left-handedness was wrongly seen as abnormal, and kids were forced to switch.
But now we know.
Now we understand it's just a natural variation on a continuum. There are no significant differences in personality or intelligence linked to handedness, and it has a strong biological and genetic basis.
That's good to hear. Given all this development, you mentioned variability in timing is normal. But are there specific red flags parents should look out for in motor development?
Yes, while the sequence is pretty predictable, the timing can vary by several months for any given milestone, and that's okay. Some babies even skip milestones, like crawling.
Right.
But certain things might warrant a chat with a pediatrician or a developmental evaluation. For instance, lack of steady head control by 4 months, or not being able to sit independently by around 9 months, or not walking independently by about 18 months.
Okay, those are helpful markers.
Yeah.
Now, the classic question, does walking early mean you have a future genius on your hands?
Yeah, people love to think that. The evidence is actually mixed. Some research finds little predictive value between early motor milestones and later intelligence.
But other studies.
Others have found some links between, say, early walking and later adaptive or cognitive skills, or conversely, delayed walking potentially being associated with certain later mental health challenges.
So, no clear answer.
Not really. It's crucial not to overgeneralize. Plenty of early walkers aren't geniuses, and plenty of later walkers are perfectly bright and capable. It's just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
How much of motor development is nature versus nurture? Is it programmed or learned?
It's definitely both. Biological maturation, the genetic timetable, brain development clearly plays a huge role in the sequence and potential.
But environment matters too.
Absolutely. Learning, practice, the environment itself, support from adults, the child's own efforts and motivation, these all influence the timing and refinement of skills.
Are there cultural differences?
Yes, significant ones sometimes. Cultural practices can influence motor development. For instance, the H people in Paraguay traditionally carried infants almost constantly for the first few years, which delays walking.
Any other examples?
Traditional South African cultures often involve carrying babies on the back for safety or while working. Some historical practices in China involved using pillows that restricted movement and prevented crawling. Swaddling, used in many cultures for comfort and protection, also limits movement.
Does cross-cultural research lean one way? Nature or nurture?
It tends to suggest that genetics probably have a somewhat greater influence on the basic sequence and timing, despite these cultural variations in experience.
What about socioeconomic status or gender?
In these first 2 years, differences related to SES or gender are generally non-existent or very small in motor development.
Okay, let's circle back to perception. We talked about newborn senses. How do those initially quite immature senses sharpen up during infancy?
They make huge leaps. Depth perception is a great example. You know the famous visual cliff experiment?
Vaguely babies on a checkerboard pattern that looks like it drops off.
That's the one. Research using it shows that infants' decisions about whether to crawl over the cliff are strongly influenced by the emotional tone of their mother's voice encouragement versus warning.
So they perceive the depth, but social cues influence their action.
Exactly. Depth perception develops gradually during the first year, actually maturing a bit sooner than the motor skills needed to act on it.
What about visual constancy?
That's the understanding that objects remain the same size, shape, and color even when they look different on our retina because of distance or angle. Like knowing a car driving away isn't actually shrinking.
Do babies get that?
Remarkably early, yes. Studies suggest size constancy is present by 18 weeks and maybe even rudimentary forms in newborns.
Any other visual improvements?
Oh, yes. Eye focusing ability improves rapidly, becoming almost adult-like by 3 months. Visual acuity sharpens dramatically, reaching near adult levels by 12 months.
And color vision.
They can distinguish most colors by 4 months, and their color perception is pretty much adult-like by 6 months.
What about face perception? Does that change?
It undergoes something called perceptual narrowing. Essentially, it becomes more specialized. They get better at distinguishing faces they see often, like those from their own racial group, and less good at distinguishing faces they don't encounter frequently.
So experience shapes face recognition.
Very much so. Infants whose main caregivers are female tend to prefer looking at female faces and vice versa. Experience tunes the system.
And hearing. Auditory perception.
Also improves significantly. Infants become sensitive to much softer sounds. And a big milestone, they usually recognize their own name by around 6 months.
Okay, perception sharpens dramatically. Let's move into cognition thinking, learning, remembering. Jean Piaget's work is foundational here, right?
Absolutely monumental. His description of the first cognitive stage, the sensoromotor stage, shaped the field.
Sensoromotor meaning learning through senses and actions.
Exactly. Infants from birth to about 2 years gain information through their sensory input, what they see, hear, touch, and their motor activities, grasping, reaching, moving. They learn by coordinating these things, like seeing something and then reaching for it,
And he broke this stage down.
into 6 substages. A key concept driving development through these stages is circular reaction.
Circular reactions.
Basically, the infant accidentally does something that's pleasurable or interesting, like sucking their thumb, and then repeats it over and over again intentionally. These repetitions help form new cognitive structures or schemas.
Can you give examples of the first couple of substages?
Sure. Substage 1, birth to about 1 month, is all about reflexes. Actions are purely reflexive grasping, sucking. There's no real intention, memory, or planning involved yet, according to Piaget.
Okay, and substage 2.
That's from about 1 to 4 months. He called this primary circular reactions. Here you start to see the beginnings of coordination between senses and actions, like listening and looking towards a sound, or looking at something and reaching for it. And the repetition is focused on the infant's own body, like that accidental thumb sucking becoming an intentional habit.
A huge development Piaget focused on was object permanence. The idea that things still exist even when you can't see them.
Yes, a cornerstone of his theory.
He suggested out of sight, out of mind was basically true for young babies.
For the youngest ones, yes.
Mm.
According to Piaget, before about 8 months, if you hide a toy under a blanket right in front of them, they won't look for it. It's just gone as far as they're concerned.
Okay.
Between 8 and 12 months, they start to grasp the concept and will search for the hidden object. They'll pull the blanket away.
But they make mistakes.
Yes, the classic A not B error. If you hide the toy repeatedly under blanket A and they find it, then you let them watch you hide it under blanket B right next to it.
They still look under A.
Often, yes, even though they just saw it go under C. Piaget believed they didn't fully master object permanence, overcoming this error consistently, until the end of the sensoromotor stage, around 18-24 months.
What about deferred imitation? Pretend play.
That was another key development Piaget highlighted, emerging towards the end of infancy. It's the ability to form a mental representation, a picture in their mind of someone else's behavior, and then imitate it later on.
Like pretending to feed a doll hours after seeing someone do it.
Exactly. He saw this as evidence of developing mental representation, which also underpins symbolic thought needed for language, categorization, and understanding numbers.
Piaget's framework was brilliant, obviously.
Yeah.
But how has modern research, with all its advanced techniques, reshaped our understanding of infant cognition? Did he get everything right?
He laid an incredible foundation, no doubt. His sequence of development generally holds up quite well, but the broad consensus among psychologists today is that he significantly underestimated infants' cognitive abilities.
Underestimated? In what ways and why?
Several reasons. First, his sample size was very small and not very diverse. He based a lot of his theories on detailed observations of his own 3 children, plus a small group of other children from high-income families in Switzerland.
So not necessarily representative.
Not representative of the vast diversity and variability among infants worldwide? No. Modern research emphasizes much larger, more diverse samples.
Okay, what else?
Second, his methods, while clever for their time, were relatively simplistic by today's standards. He didn't use control groups in the way we do now, and he lacked the sophisticated lab techniques we have.
Like measuring looking time.
Exactly. Modern methods measure things like how long babies look at surprising events, their reaching behavior, how they search for objects, using tasks with partially or fully hidden objects, sometimes combined with sound cues.
And these methods show.
They reveal signs of object permanence much earlier than Piaget thought. Some studies suggest hints of it as early as 2.5 months, and a clearer understanding that hidden objects still exist by 4 months.
So the A not B error isn't just about lacking object permanence.
Current thinking links it more to developing inhibitory control, the ability to stop a previously rewarded action and information processing skills, rather than just a complete lack of object permanence. It's more nuanced.
And the third reason Piaget might have underestimated them.
He couldn't measure brain activity. Modern techniques like EEG or fNIRs allow us to see patterns of brain activation. This evidence suggests infants possess memory, demonstrate goal-directed behavior, and form mental combinations much earlier than Piaget believed.
Which means things like imitation and symbolic skills develop earlier too.
Yes, the timelines for imitation, deferred imitation, and the foundations of symbolic thought like language and categorization seem to be pushed earlier based on this newer evidence.
Have cross-cultural studies shed any light on Piaget's sensorimotor stage?
It's actually the least studied of Piaget's stages cross-culturally, surprisingly. But the studies that exist show remarkable similarity in the qualitative characteristics, the basic sequence across different cultures.
But maybe some minor differences in timing.
Yes, some minor differences have been noted. For example, one study found a slight advance in some sensor motor skills for African infants compared to American infants at 6 months. These might reflect different developmental contexts. Perhaps European infants get more experience manipulating objects, while some African infants might receive more social stimulation, influencing development in slightly different ways.
Okay, so given that infants are maybe smarter than we thought, does this mean we should be actively trying to stimulate their cognitive development? The whole super baby idea with flashcards and intense programs.
That's a really important question, and the research here is pretty clear. Environments that overwhelm children with stimulation that's beyond their current capabilities can actually be harmful to brain potential.
Harmful. As bad as understimulation.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Those expensive programs using flashcards, intense drills, constant stimulation, there's simply no good evidence that they create smarter babies or give them a long-term advantage.
What can happen instead?
It can lead to babies becoming withdrawn, tuning out, and it can actually threaten their natural curiosity and interest in learning. Plus, it can set parents up for disappointment if their child doesn't become a genius.
So what is the best approach?
Age-appropriate, moderate stimulation within a loving, responsive, interactive environment. Lots of talking, playing, reading, exploring together. That provides the rich input developing brains need without overwhelming them.
That sounds much more enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah.
Now, memory. How does that develop in infancy? Can babies actually remember things?
Yes, definitely. We see evidence of implicit memory very early on. That includes episodic memory, remembering specific events, even if they can't talk about them, and procedural memory, knowing how things work, like anticipating routines, recognizing cues for bath time or bedtime, knowing what to expect from mom or dad.
So they learn patterns and routines. What about remembering facts or words?
That's explicit memory, specifically semantic memory learning, words, concepts, facts. That starts to emerge more clearly between 6 and 12 months.
How important is infant memory?
It's incredibly important for later development. It influences early word learning, how they categorize things, and likely forms the very foundation for how later memories are encoded. It's possible babies store far more emotions, sensations, information than they can actively recall or express later.
That leads perfectly into language acquisition, arguably one of the most amazing, complex tasks humans master. How does that incredible journey from just crying to actual conversation unfold?
It is astonishing, and one key principle is that receptive language understanding comes before productive language speaking.
They understand more than they can say.
Way more. Babies typically understand hundreds of words before they utter their first meaningful word.
What are the stages before words? Pre-linguistic speech.
Yes, there's a fairly predictable sequence. It starts with undifferentiated crying right at birth, basically one cry for all needs. From about 2 months, crying becomes more differentiated. Parents often learn to distinguish the cry for hunger from the cry for pain, for example.
What goes after crying?
Around 2 months, you get cooing. Those lovely vowel-like sounds, squeals, gurgles, usually when they're happy and content.
And then babbling?
Right. Starting around 5 or 6 months, this is the repetition of consonant-vowel combinations like ba-ba-ba, ma-ma-ma, da-da-da.
Is babbling learned by listening?
Interestingly, even deaf infants start to babble around the same time, which suggests there's a strong biological maturational trigger. But if they can't hear themselves or others, the vocal babbling tends to fade out, and they might start babbling with their hands if exposed to sign language. Hearing is crucial for vocal babbling to continue and develop.
What follows babbling?
Around 7-8 months, there's lalation, which is repeating sounds or words they hear, often incorrectly or accidentally at first, but it's building blocks. Then, around 9-10 months, echolalia, where they imitate sounds and words more deliberately and accurately.
And all this leads up to the first actual words.
Yeah.
Now, a modern question. Screen time. We hear so much about it.
Yeah.
What does the research say about screen time for babies and toddlers and its impact on language development?
The research generally points towards negative effects, especially excessive screen time.
How's that?
Studies have found that children aged 18 months to 3 years who watch more than, say, 4 hours of television daily have a significantly higher risk, like 4 times higher, of experiencing language delays.
Why would that be?
The main reason is displacement. Time spent passively watching a screen is time not spent engaging in real-world interactions, talking with caregivers, playing, exploring objects, listening to stories read aloud. Those interactions are crucial fuel for language learning.
What about educational baby DVDs or apps?
Most child development experts and psychologists are pretty skeptical about their value for infants. Babies under 2 generally lack the cognitive skills to understand that 2D images on a screen represent real 3D objects or to follow narratives in a meaningful way. They learn best from live, responsive, three-dimensional
So
interactions.
parents are the best teachers.
Absolutely. Parents and other primary caregivers are a child's first and most important teachers. We instinctively adjust how we talk to babies using simpler sentences, higher pitch, repetition often called parentese or infant-directed speech. It's that responsive conversation, encouragement, and interaction that are the most powerful drivers of language and cognitive development.
Okay, so interaction trumps screens. How do experts explain language development overall? There are different theories, right?
Yes, broadly, there are a few main perspectives. One is the learning theory, associated with behaviorists like B.F. Skinner.
What's the idea there?
It suggests children learn language primarily through imitation, copying the speech they hear around them, and reinforcement parents positively responding to or correcting their utterances. Parents act as models and shape language by expanding on what the child says.
Seems plausible, was another view.
The nativist approach, most famously associated with Noam Chomsky and also Eric Lenneberg.
Nativist meaning innate.
Exactly. This perspective argues that humans are biologically pre-wired to acquire language. Chomsky proposed the existence of an innate language acquisition device, or LAD, in the brain.
A specific brain module for language.
Sort of. A hypothetical mechanism responsible for understanding the underlying structure of language and generating grammatically correct sentences. Chomsky pointed to universal grammar characteristics common to all human languages, like having subjects and objects, or ways to form questions as evidence that children inherently know the basic rules.
What did Lenneberg add?
Lenneberg linked language acquisition closely to biological maturation and proposed the idea of a sensitive period for language learning, likely before puberty, during which the brain is optimally receptive.
Is there evidence for a sensitive period?
Some comes from tragic cases like Jeannie, a girl severely isolated until age 13 who, despite intensive teaching, never fully mastered complex grammar or syntax. Also, studies of deaf individuals learning sign language show that those who learn it later, after age 12, often make more grammatical errors than native signers.
Okay, so the nativist view suggests it's largely built in. Are there criticisms of this perspective, and what's the general thinking today?
Yes, there are criticisms. One is that a specific universal grammar system hasn't actually been identified in the brain. Another is that language acquisition isn't quite as effortless or rapid as the nativist view sometimes implies. Mastering the core structure takes several years and a lot of inductive learning.
And the sensitive period.
That idea also has contradictions. Think of adults who learn second languages fluently, seemingly without accent, like the actress Charlize Theron learning English at 20. And some studies show older children can actually learn aspects of a second language faster than younger children in formal settings.
So if it's not purely learned and not purely innate, what's the current consensus?
Most psychologists today favor an interactionist perspective. They believe language acquisition emerges from a complex interplay between innate abilities, our biological predisposition for language, maturational factors developing learning strategies, cognitive development, and crucially, the linguistic and social environment.
So nature and nurture working together.
Precisely. No single factor operates in isolation. It's a dynamic process involving the child's biology, their cognitive skills, and the rich linguistic input and social interaction they receive.
Okay, let's shift to personality and social development. How do babies start developing their unique personalities, their emotional lives?
Again, there are several influential perspectives. The psychoanalytic view from Freud and later Erik Erikson put a lot of emphasis on early experiences.
Like feeding and toilet training.
Freud focused heavily on how parents handled those stages. Erikson broadened it, emphasizing the importance of responding to the infant's psychosocial needs, providing comfort, warmth, and consistent care.
Erikson had stages too, right?
Yes. His first stage, covering the first year, is basic trust versus mistrust. The idea is that consistent, sensitive caregiving builds a foundation of trust and self-confidence. If care is inconsistent or rejecting, the infant develops mistrust.
And the next stage.
That's roughly ages 2-3, called autonomy versus shame and doubt. Here, as toddlers strive for independence, wanting to do things themselves, parental guidance that allows exploration within reasonable limits fosters a sense of autonomy. Overly controlling or critical parenting can lead to feelings of shame and doubt about their abilities.
Does modern psychology personality is set so early.
That's an important point. While these early experiences are definitely influential, most modern child psychologists believe personality continues to develop and evolve throughout life. It's not fixed in the first few years.
Okay. What about other perspectives? Ethological.
Yes, the ethological perspective, particularly John Bowlby's work on attachment, views the first 2 years as a sensitive period for forming close emotional bonds.
Attachment for survival.
Exactly. Bowlby argued that attachment behaviors, crying, smiling, clinging, are instinctive responses that evolved because they keep the infant close to the caregiver, increasing chances of survival and well-being. Failing to form these bonds puts the infant at risk for later social and personality difficulties.
How do researchers even study emotions in babies? They can't tell us how they feel.
It is definitely challenging. Researchers have to be creative. They rely on observable indicators, analyzing facial expressions using standardized coding systems, observing body movements and posture, listening to vocalizations like cries and coos, measuring looking behavior, what captures their attention.
Are there ethical limits?
Absolutely. Strict ethical guidelines prohibit inducing strong negative emotions, for example. Research must prioritize the infant's well-being.
Let's talk about specific emotional expressions. Smiling, it seems so fundamental.
It is. It starts as a reflexive behavior, even seen in newborns during sleep. But as the cerebral cortex matures, smiling becomes voluntary, controlled, and powerfully social.
Social how?
A baby's smile is incredibly rewarding for caregivers. It serves an adaptive function by strengthening the parent-child bond, eliciting positive interaction, and promoting a warm, supportive relationship. It's hardwired to make us want to care for them.
And crying.
Yeah.
What about different types of cries?
Newborns cry mainly due to physical discomfort, hunger, pain, cold, wetness. But the patterns evolve. Researchers identify a few basic types. The basic cry, often for hunger, which has a rhythmic pattern. The angry cry, where more air is forced through the vocal cords. And the pain cry, characterized by a sudden, long initial cry, followed by a long silence holding their breath, then a gasp.
Does crying change as they get older?
Yes. By around 2 months, crying becomes more voluntary and communicative. It can be used as a demand, to get attention, or to protest something. It's worth noting that excessive, inconsolable crying in infancy has sometimes been linked to later adaptive and behavioral problems.
So a cry or a smile isn't just an expression, it's communication.
Exactly. It's one of the very first forms of social action, designed to elicit a response and stimulate that crucial two-way interaction, that dance between caregiver and child.
How important is that emotional interaction?
It's fundamental. Infants who are emotionally neglected, even if physically cared for, can sometimes show non-organic failure to thrive. They fail to grow and develop properly simply due to the lack of responsive emotional connection.
Wow. So how do infants learn to manage these strong emotions? Emotion regulation.
Emotion regulation is the ability to monitor, evaluate, and modify emotional reactions, controlling emotions, behavior, thoughts in adaptive ways. And infants start developing this very early.
How do they do it?
Even very young infants show simple, self-soothing behaviors like sucking on their fingers or turning their head away from something overwhelming. By 6 months, they might more deliberately look away or start to fuss as a way to manage distress.
And later?
By 12 months, they use more active self-soothing strategies, thumb-sucking, rocking, clinging to a comfort object like a blanket, and also distraction, like chewing on a toy or shifting their attention to something else. By 18-24 months, they can start actively trying to change the situation causing distress or verbally ask for comfort.
What can caregivers do to help infants develop good emotion regulation skills and minimize negativity?
There are lots of practical things. Being a safe harbor, a reliable source of comfort and support that the child can return to after exploring. Making the home environment predictable and child-friendly.
What about discipline?
Definitely avoiding physical punishment. It's generally ineffective long-term and can model aggression. Providing limited, age-appropriate choices gives toddlers a sense of control. Being consistent with expectations and rules is key.
Any other tips?
Gently reminding children of required behavior instead of just demanding. Trying not to interrupt their activities abruptly if possible, giving a warning helps transitions. Waiting a moment before repeating requests, giving them processing time, suggesting alternative acceptable activities if one is forbidden, and phrasing things as requests, can you please put the blocked away, rather than commands when appropriate.
Does culture play a role in emotional expression?
Yes, there are cultural variations. For example, studies suggest that by the end of the first year, infants in some East Asian cultures, like Chinese and Japanese infants, tend to cry and smile less intensely or frequently compared to American infants, potentially reflecting cultural norms around emotional display.
Okay, let's talk about temperament. We often say babies have distinct personalities right from birth. Is that what temperament is?
That's a great way to think about it. Temperament refers to an individual's characteristic innate style of behaving and reacting emotionally. It's considered largely biological in origin, present even in the fetus. Some are more active in the womb than others.
Who's the foundation of personality?
Yes, it's seen as the early building blocks. It's more than just a list of traits, though. It's really about the interplay between the child's reactive impulses, how strongly they react to things, and their developing ability to control those reactions, their self-regulation.
What are the key dimensions researchers look at?
Modern models often focus on three broad dimensions. First, effortful control.
What does that include?
Things like the ability to focus attention, shift attention when needed, inhibit impulses, plan actions, notice subtle stimuli, and derive pleasure from low-intensity activities. It's about self-regulation.
Okay. Second dimension.
Negative affectivity. This captures the tendency to experience negative emotions like frustration, fear, sadness, discomfort, and also how easily they are soothed after being distressed.
And the third.
Extroversion surgency. This relates to activity level, impulsivity, shyness, low shyness being part of surgency, enjoyment of high-intensity pleasure, smiling and laughter, positive anticipation, and seeking closeness with others.
Are these temperament dimensions linked to adult personality?
Yes, they show considerable links to the big five personality traits: extroversion, neuroticism linked to negative affectivity, conscientiousness linked to effortful control, agreeableness, and openness. Temperament is seen as the early precursor.
How do cultural factors interact with temperament? Does a difficult baby mean the same thing everywhere?
That's where it gets really interesting. While the basic biological processes of temperament seem universal, how a particular temperament plays out and how it's valued can differ hugely across cultures.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A temperament often labeled difficult in Western societies, characterized by high intensity, irregularity, withdrawal from new things, negative mood might predict behavioral problems later on in that context.
And elsewhere.
But in a study of the Maasai people in Kenya, infants with those same difficult characteristics were actually more likely to survive during periods of drought. Why? Because their demanding cries ensured they got more attention and feeding from caregivers. Their temperament was adaptive in that specific environment.
Wow, that completely flips the script.
It does. Similarly, American culture often encourages positive affect and sociability, perhaps leading to more children who are easygoing and easily soothed. South American cultures might encourage more animated interaction, potentially leading to children who are more energetic but maybe have shorter attention spans. Southeast Asian cultures often place a high value on behavioral control and calmness.
So it's about the fit between the child and the environment.
Exactly. This brings us to the crucial concept of goodness of fit, developed by researchers Thomas and Chess.
Goodness of fit.
It refers to the compatibility, or match, between a baby's temperament and the demands and expectations of their environment, especially the parent's temperament, attitudes, and child-rearing practices.
So the outcome depends on the match.
Precisely. Optimal development happens when there's a good fit. A baby with a difficult temperament can absolutely thrive if they have parents who are patient, responsive, understand their needs, and adapt their parenting style accordingly. It's not the temperament itself that dooms them, but a poor fit with their environment.
That's a really hopeful message for parents. Okay, let's talk about the self-concept. When does a baby actually start to develop a sense of self, of being a distinct person?
The self-concept is essentially our answer to the question, who am I? It's that unique set of traits, abilities, values, and characteristics we believe define us.
Does it have different parts?
Psychologists often distinguish between the subjective self, or the I, that basic inherent feeling that I exist, I'm an agent acting in the world separate from others.
And the objective self?
Right, the objective self, or the me and mine. This refers to the self as an object of knowledge and evaluation, the qualities we understand about ourselves, like our physical appearance, our temperament, I'm shy, our social skills. There's also the emotional self-understanding and regulating one's own emotions.
When does this sense of self emerge?
There's some debate. Some psychologists argue babies have an elementary sense of being separate from their surroundings right from the beginning. Others point to more concrete evidence, like self-recognition in a mirror, the famous Rouge test. where babies touch a spot of rouge on their own nose rather than the mirror image.
When does that usually happen?
Typically emerges around 18 months of age.
What helps this self-awareness develop?
Several factors contribute. Cognitive development, especially brain maturation, is crucial. Social interaction plays a huge role, caregivers responding to the baby as an individual, using their name, and later, the toddler's own assertions of me and mine as they develop ownership concepts.
Does culture influence self-awareness?
It seems to. Self-awareness, particularly the objective self, me, might develop somewhat faster or be expressed differently in individualistic cultures, like urban Germany or the US, where independence and uniqueness are emphasized.
Compared to collectivistic cultures?
Right. In more collectivistic cultures, like perhaps rural communities in India or the Niso culture in Cameroon, the emphasis might be more on interdependence, group harmony, and sensitivity to others' needs, potentially leading to a different developmental trajectory for self-concept. Maternal responsiveness, however, seems universally correlated with later self-recognition.
Okay, moving beyond the self to relationships with others. Social development. Attachment seems like the cornerstone here.
It really is. Attachment refers to that strong, enduring emotional bond that develops, particularly between infants and their primary caregivers. It provides a sense of internal security and confidence.
Erickson linked it to trust.
Yes, Erickson's first stage, trust versus mistrust, directly relates to the formation of attachment. Bowlby's work further detailed how it develops.
Bowlby saw it developing in phases.
Yes, he argued attachment isn't present at birth, but unfolds gradually through a series of phases over the first year or two, driven by those innate behaviors like crying, smiling, and clinging that keep the caregiver close.
And Mary Ainsworth developed a way to assess attachment.
Yes, her groundbreaking strange situation procedure is a standardized laboratory task designed to assess the quality of the attachment relationship between about 1 and 2 years of age.
What are the main patterns she identified?
The most common is secure attachment. These babies use their caregiver as a secure base from which to explore the unfamiliar room. They might be upset when the caregiver leaves, but they are easily comforted upon reunion and resume playing.
Okay, that's secure.
Uh,
What about insecure types?
There are a few patterns of insecure attachment. Insecure avoidant babies seem unresponsive to the parent when they are present. They usually aren't distressed when the parent leaves, and they react to the stranger similarly to the parent. Upon reunion, they avoid or are slow to greet the parent.
And another type.
Ambivalent or resistant attachment. These infants often seem anxious and clingy even before the parent leaves. They are typically extremely distressed when the parent departs, but upon reunion, they behave ambivalently. They might seek contact, but then resist comfort, sometimes showing anger.
Is there a fourth type?
Yes, later researchers identified disorganized, disoriented attachment. This pattern reflects the greatest insecurity. These infants show confused, contradictory behaviors upon reunion. They might look away while being held, approach the parent with a flat, depressed expression, or show odd, frozen postures.
What's associated with disorganized attachment?
It's often linked to challenging infant-caregiver relationships, sometimes involving caregiver fright or trauma, high levels of socioeconomic deprivation, and unfortunately, it's considered a predictor for later adjustment problems.
Now, the big question. Are these attachment types secure, avoidant, ambivalent, disorganized, universal? Did they mean the same thing in all cultures?
That's a really critical point of discussion and research. The short answer is not entirely.
Oh, so?
The strange situation procedure itself and the interpretation of the behaviors seen in it might not be equally valid or meaningful across different cultural contexts.
Can you give examples?
Sure. Studies in Germany often find a higher proportion of infants classified as avoidant compared to the U.S. But this might reflect German cultural values emphasizing infant independence early on rather than true insecurity.
What about other cultures?
In Japan, studies sometimes find higher rates of ambivalent-resistant attachment. This could relate to the cultural emphasis on mother-infant closeness and the fact that Japanese infants experience very few separations from their mothers, making the strange situation unusually stressful.
And in African cultures?
In cultures like the Neso in Cameroon or the Beng in Côte d'Ivoire, where infants are typically cared for by many people and strangers are often greeted with friendliness, babies may show less negative reaction to the stranger or the separation in the strange situation, which doesn't necessarily fit neatly into Ainsworth's original categories.
So the categories might not be healthy versus deviant.
Exactly. Some researchers argue they might represent different culturally adaptive adjustment categories rather than universal measures of secure versus insecure attachment. What seems more universal, however, is the idea of secure base behavior,
Meaning?
the tendency for infants, across cultures, to turn to a trusted caregiver as a safe haven when they are distressed or frightened. That fundamental function of attachment seems widespread.
Okay, that makes sense. What specific factors influence how attachment develops between an infant and caregiver?
Several things play a role. First, the infant's own behaviors, those innate signals like crying, sucking, smiling, clinging, are designed to elicit caregiving responses. How effectively the caregiver reads and responds to these signals is key.
So responsive mothers foster secure attachment.
Generally, yes. Warm, sensitive, and consistently responsive mothering is strongly linked to secure attachment. Inconsistent or ineffective responses to infant distress might contribute to insecure resistant attachment.
Does the baby's temperament matter?
It does, but maybe not directly as much as we might think. Babies aren't passive. A baby with a difficult temperament might pose more challenges for the caregiver, potentially affecting the relationship. But again, it comes back to that goodness of fit.
So responsive parenting can buffer a difficult temperament.
Absolutely. Sensitive, responsive caregiving that adapts to the difficult baby's needs can absolutely minimize risks and foster secure attachment. The parent's response is often more crucial than the baby's initial temperament.
What about when mothers work outside the home? Does that negatively impact attachment?
That's a really complex issue with no simple answer. Maternal employment itself isn't necessarily harmful to attachment.
When is it okay and when might it be problematic?
It tends not to be negative if it doesn't create significant conflict within the family, if the mother doesn't feel overly guilty or stressed about it, and if she has good social support and quality childcare arrangements. It can be harmful if it leads to high levels of family conflict, maternal guilt, lack of support, inconsistent or poor quality parenting due to stress, or if the stress negatively impacts interactions when the mother is home.
What other factors influence attachment security? Psychosocial factors.
Definitely. Things like marital conflict, poverty, exposure to trauma, and lack of social support can all put stress on parents, making it harder for them to be consistently responsive, sensitive, and non-intrusive. This increases the risk for insecure attachment.
Is there research on this in specific communities?
Yes, for instance, research among Xhosa communities in South Africa found high rates of disorganized attachment linked to mothers exhibiting high levels of frightened or dissociated behaviors, possibly related to past trauma. However, the cultural practice of Ubuntu collective child rearing also provided protective factors.
What about parents' mental health?
That's a significant factor. Parents struggling with mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, or substance addiction often find it very difficult to form close, secure attachment relationships with their infants, increasing the risk for attachment problems.
Shifting to a very recent challenge, COVID-19. How might the pandemic, especially things like widespread mask wearing, have impacted early attachment development?
That's a concern researchers are actively exploring. We know face-to-face interaction is incredibly important for attachment. Infants are biologically attuned to faces.
And masks obscure faces.
Exactly. Masks cover expressive regions like the mouth and nose, and they can muffle speech cues.
Okay.
This could potentially present challenges for reading emotional signals and developing that smooth interactional synchrony, especially for infants in settings like long-term neonatal units where caregiver interaction might already be limited.
Are there ways to mitigate potential negative effects?
Yes, people have developed strategies. Using clear masks when possible and safe, playing games like peekaboo that involve revealing the smile, explicitly teaching young children to read emotions in the eyes and eyebrows, using more gestures like waving or thumbs up, and talking to children about why people are wearing masks. It requires more conscious effort from caregivers.
Okay, looking long term, what are the lasting impacts of early attachment quality, and are there criticisms of attachment theory overall?
Generally, research shows that secure attachment in infancy is associated with a wide range of positive outcomes later in life.
Such as?
Better academic achievement, stronger cognitive skills, better emotional regulation, more positive social relationships. Securely attached children tend to be more curious, self-directed, and engaged learners. Some studies even link secure attachment to higher IQ scores and potential protection against cognitive decline in adulthood.
That sounds pretty definitive, but are there criticisms?
Yes, and they're important. First, attachment is just one factor among many influencing long-term well-being. Secure attachment doesn't guarantee success, and insecure attachment absolutely does not doom a child to problems.
So it's not deterministic.
Not at all. The concept of resilience, a child's ability to cope with adversity and recover, is often neglected in simpler interpretations of attachment theory. Children are not just passive victims of their early experiences. Many insecurely attached infants grow up to be well-adjusted adults.
What about the research methods?
Most studies linking early attachment to later outcomes are correlational, not causal. So, while there's an association, we can't definitively say early attachment caused the later outcome. Subsequent adjustment problems might stem from ongoing problematic parenting or stressful life events, not just the initial attachment classification.
Can attachment quality change over time?
Yes, definitely. Attachment security isn't set in stone. Major life events like divorce, parental loss, or significant improvements in family circumstances can lead to changes in attachment patterns. Children can also have different types of attachment relationships with different caregivers. For example, secure with mother and secure with father.
What about institutional care, like orphanages?
Early institutional care, especially if it's low quality, is a known risk factor for attachment problems. However, placement in high-quality foster or adoptive care, especially before 24 months, with stable, motivated, and sensitive caregivers can significantly improve attachment security and outcomes.
We've talked a lot about mothers. What about the father's role in attachment?
Increasingly recognized as very important. The quality of the father-child relationship matters more than just his physical presence. A warm, supportive marital relationship tends to promote positive attachment behaviors in both parents towards the infant.
Are there cultures where fathers are more involved early on?
Yes, the Aka Pygmies in Central Africa are often cited as an example where fathers traditionally spend almost as much time holding and caring for infants as mothers do.
And what about other caregivers? Grandparents? Siblings?
Also crucial, especially in many non-Western cultures. Research in places across Africa and India shows that children often form strong, close attachment bonds with multiple caregivers, grandparents, older siblings, aunts, uncles, other community members.
Alloparenting?
Exactly, that system where individuals other than the biological parents help raise children. It's very common globally and suggests that the traditional Western focus solely on the mother-child diet might be too limited in its cultural applicability. It often truly does take a village.
Okay, another common social phenomenon, stranger anxiety. That phase when babies suddenly become wary or fearful of unfamiliar people.
Yes, a very normal developmental phase. It usually begins around 8 months, often peaks somewhere between 10 and 18 months, and typically resolves by about 24 months.
Do all babies experience it?
Not all, and the intensity varies greatly. It tends to occur most strongly when the primary caregiver, usually the mother, is absent, and least strongly in familiar settings or when the mother is holding the child.
What makes babies react more positively to strangers?
Giving them time to warm up, rather than the stranger approaching too quickly or intensely. If the stranger is another child, they often react better. And babies with secure attachments tend to show less intense stranger anxiety.
Do child rearing practices or culture influence it?
Yes, babies regularly cared for by multiple people often show less anxiety, and some cultures actively socialize infants to be friendly and open towards unfamiliar people.
Why does stranger anxiety happen? What are the explanations?
There are several viewpoints. Cognitive. The stranger's face doesn't match the baby's existing schema for familiar faces, creating a disturbing incongruity. Behavioral, they can't assimilate the new image, leading to tension. Contingency. Interactions with strangers are unpredictable, violating the baby's expectation of control. Evolutionary. It's seen as part of an evolved, universal system to protect infants from potential danger posed by the unknown.
Any other explanations?
Some cultural interpretations exist. For example, in some traditional African beliefs, strong fear of a stranger might be interpreted as a sign that the stranger is bad, or perhaps even bewitched. And there's likely a genetic component, as identical twins tend to show more similar levels of stranger anxiety than fraternal twins.
Okay, as babies become toddlers in that second year, parents start teaching them about rules and acceptable behavior. Socialization.
Right. Socialization is that lifelong process of learning the norms, values, skills, and behaviors expected by one's community or culture. Parents are usually the most important agents of socialization, especially early on.
Does the parent's role change in the second year?
Often, yes. The mother's role, for example, might shift from being primarily about physical care and comfort to also being more of a teacher, expecting a bit more independence and compliance.
How do parents socialize their children?
Through direct teaching, say thank you, by acting as role models, children often imitate parents' behavior, warm parents tend to have warmer children, and by controlling the child's social environment, choosing the neighborhood, playmates, activities.
Are children just passive recipients?
Not at all. Children's own unique personalities, temperaments, and genetic predispositions also actively shape how parents interact with them and the socialization practices they use. It's a two-way street.
What discipline techniques are generally considered most effective or favorable during these early years?
Techniques that focus on teaching and guiding are usually best. Positive reinforcement, rewarding desired behaviors with praise, hugs, smiles, is very effective. Induction is another key one.
Induction meaning.
Reasoning with the child, explaining why a behavior is wrong or right, explaining the consequences of their actions for others, setting clear limits and explaining them. It helps them internalize rules. And scaffolding, where parents provide just enough support to help the child succeed at a task they couldn't quite manage alone, builds skills and confidence.
What about less favorable techniques?
Power assertion, things like physical punishment, forceful commands, threats, withdrawing privileges, tends to be less effective long term and can lead to negative outcomes like increased aggression or resentment. Withdrawal of love, ignoring the child, acting cold, threatening abandonment can induce compliance, but often at the cost of anxiety and avoidance of the parent.
Do parents change techniques as kids get older?
Yes, generally parents tend to rely less on physical methods and more on verbal reasoning and commands as children's cognitive and language skills develop.
Let's tackle a classic toddler challenge. Toilet training. When is the right time to start? There seems to be so much pressure.
The key thing to remember is that it's not about a specific calendar age, but about the child's readiness.
Readiness in what sense? Biological? Psychological?
Both. Biological readiness involves the maturity of the central nervous system and neuromuscular control needed to consciously control bladder and Babel sphincter muscles. Psychological readiness includes being able to understand and follow simple instructions, sit upright stably, maybe communicate the need to go, and show some interest.
So when does that readiness typically emerge?
Usually not before 18 months, and often closer to 20, 24 months or even later for many children.
Yeah.
Trying to train much earlier than that often creates unnecessary pressure and conflict, potentially delaying the process.
So patience is key.
Absolutely. How parents approach toilet training is much more important than the exact age it starts. A relaxed, supportive, positive attitude with lots of encouragement and patience for accidents is crucial for success.
Are there gender differences?
Girls do tend to complete toilet training on average about 2-3 months earlier than boys, likely due to slightly faster physiological maturation in this area.
Okay. What about thumb sucking? Should parents worry about that?
Thumb sucking, or using a pacifier, meets a very real and natural need for sucking and self-soothing in infants and toddlers. It's generally harmless.
Does it damage teeth?
There's no conclusive evidence of long-term dental damage unless the habit continues intensely past age 5 or 7 or when permanent teeth are coming in. Again, parents' sensitive, non-punitive reaction is important, understanding it as a comfort mechanism.
And weaning. Moving from milk to solids.
Weaning is the gradual process of decreasing one type of food, like breast milk or formula, and introducing others, typically solid foods. Solids are usually introduced starting around 6 months.
Is there a readiness sign for solids too?
Yes, similar to toilet training, readiness is key. Signs include having at least doubled their birth weight, being able to sit up well without support, having good head control, and showing interest in what parents are eating.
How long does weaning take?
It's gradual, can take weeks or months. It's about introducing new tastes and textures slowly. Cultural practices vary widely too. In some traditional African cultures, for example, weaning from the breast might happen much later, between 2 and 3 years old, often timed when the mother is ready for another child. Methods might include putting unpleasant substances on the nipples, binding the breasts, or sometimes temporarily sending the child to stay with grandparents.
Let's talk about siblings. They often play a huge lifelong role. How do those relationships start?
Siblings can be incredibly important figures in a child's life right from the start. They can be attachment figures themselves, powerful socialization agents. Older siblings often act as caregivers and teachers, especially in some cultures.
How does the arrival of a new baby typically affect the older sibling?
It's often initially upsetting for the older child, especially if they're young. They might show some regression, like reverting to thumb sucking or having toileting accidents or display jealousy or aggression towards the baby.
But they adapt.
Most adapt fairly quickly, especially with parental support. Things like the father increasing his interaction with the older child, involving the older child in caring to the baby, emphasizing their big sibling status, ensuring quality one-on-one time, and actively discouraging expressions of jealousy can all help the adjustment.
What about peers? Friends their own age. How are those interactions different from family?
Peers are unique because they offer an egalitarian relationship. Unlike parents or older siblings, peers are equals.
What do children learn from peers?
They learn crucial social skills that are hard to learn elsewhere: how to compromise, compete fairly, cooperate, lead, follow, manage conflict, all among equals. They also get direct feedback from peers about their social competence, which contributes to their developing sense of self.
Does peer interaction develop in stages?
Yes. Early peer interactions often progress through phases.
Hmm.
Initially, it might be object-centered, two babies interacting mostly around a shared toy, sometimes leading to conflicts over that toy. In the next phase, babies might start actively trying to elicit responses from each other, maybe by offering a toy or vocalizing. And later, they might start exchanging roles more smoothly, taking turns in simple interactive games.
Are these early peer relationships important long term?
Yes, research suggests the quality of early peer relations can significantly impact later social adjustment, relationships, and even mental health. Building positive social skills early on is really beneficial.
Finally, for parents or professionals working with infants, how can we assess their development? Can we actually do psychological testing with babies who can't talk or follow complex instructions?
It is definitely challenging, precisely because of their limited communication skills, attention spans, and responsiveness.
Hmm.
But yes, infant assessment is possible and necessary.
What's the main purpose of assessing infants?
It's usually focused on monitoring developmental progress, identifying potential strengths or weaknesses, for example, for adoption planning, screening for developmental delays or problems like motor or cognitive issues, or evaluating the effectiveness of interventions over time. It relies heavily on structured observation of behavior and responses to specific stimuli.
And that brings us towards the end of this really packed deep dive. What a journey through the first 2 years. From that initial, almost alien-like, defeated boxer appearance of a neonate.
Right. To the incredibly complex social, emotional, and cognitive world of a 2-year-old toddler.
We've really seen how that period, once dismissed as just blooming, buzzing confusion, is actually just packed with astonishing adjustments, incredible innate capabilities, and truly explosive learning.
Across every domain, physical, cognitive, personality, social, it all happens so fast.
You've learned about the surprisingly sharp senses of newborns, those vital adjustments they make just to survive outside the womb, how their brains are literally pruning themselves for efficiency.
The really complex and nuanced debates around things like breastfeeding for HIV-positive mothers in different contexts, and the profound, undeniable impact of culture and caregivers on everything from learning to walk to learning to talk and forming attachments.
So here's a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
Considering just how much complex development is happening, often unseen, in these incredibly foundational first 2 years, and keeping in mind that research bias we mentioned right at the start, the focus on high-income countries, how might a truly deeper, more culturally inclusive understanding of infancy change things?
Yeah. How might it transform our approaches to early childhood education, to parenting support, intervention programs, not just in affluent nations, but globally, where most of the world's children live?
Something to mull over.
Hmm?
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.